He had everything: wealth, power, and fame. To the world, he was untouchable. But one night, standing in front of a broken mirror, he realized the truth. He no longer recognized the man staring back at him. This is the story of a millionaire who lost everything only to discover what truly matters. Michael stood in his penthouse, the glittering city stretching far beyond the glass walls. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of electricity. In front of him stood a tall mirror framed in gold, reflecting his image back. A new crack split across its surface, jagged and sharp. The fracture distorted his face into something unfamiliar. He leaned closer, searching for the man he once knew, but the reflection mocked him. One side showed the polished billionaire, flawless suit, perfect posture. The other side, fragmented, revealed tired eyes and shadows of doubt. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold surface. For a moment, it felt as if the glass pulsed back. Pulling his hand away quickly, Michael turned to pour himself a drink. The whiskey glimmered in crystal, amber light catching on the glass. He sipped, but the burn did little to soothe him. Each swallow only deepened the emptiness in his chest. He glanced back at the mirror, unable to ignore it. The crack became a symbol in his mind, cutting through his success. He thought of the boy he once was, running through narrow streets barefoot, dreaming not of riches but of making a difference. That boy's reflection was nowhere to be found now. All that remained was a stranger. Michael tried to laugh it off, but the sound felt hollow in the vast room. The penthouse was enormous, filled with art, polished marble, and silence. A man could lose himself here and never be found again. The wealth had brought comfort, but also loneliness. The mirror seemed to know it. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the last time he had felt truly alive. The moments flashed faintly laughter from his childhood, promises made under starlit skies. He had buried those memories beneath contracts, deals, and boardrooms. Now they clawed their way back. The city lights outside continued to sparkle, indifferent to his turmoil. Cars rushed below, lives carried on, none aware of the man trapped above them. Michael had everything anyone could want, yet he felt stripped of the one thing that mattered: himself. The whiskey glass trembled in his hand, and he set it down quickly. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. He tried to remind himself of all he had achieved, yet each reminder felt like an accusation, not a triumph. The crack in the mirror was winning. Michael sat down heavily on a leather chair, staring at nothing. The silence stretched, pressing on his thoughts. He remembered the first dollar he ever earned, the pride of buying his mother a small gift. That memory felt brighter than any millions he held now. He looked at the mirror again before the night ended. The fractured glass reflected the city's glow, distorted and broken. In its depths, Michael didn't see power or success. He saw emptiness staring back, asking him who he had truly become, and he had no answer. If this beginning touched you and you want to follow Michael's journey, make sure to subscribe now. More chapters are coming, and each one will bring you closer to the truth behind his story. The morning sunlight filtered through the massive windows, warming the penthouse. Yet even bathed in gold, the place felt cold. Michael moved slowly, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. The rooms were perfect, spotless, and soulless. His wealth was on display everywhere, but it gave no comfort. He entered the dining room, where a table stretched far beyond his needs. Silver trays of breakfast lay untouched, fruits shining like jewels. He sat at the head of the table, staring at empty chairs. Once, he imagined filling them with family. Now they were reminders of what he lacked. Lifting the silver lid from one tray, he found food prepared with care. But the aroma stirred nothing in him. Appetite was a luxury he no longer felt. He pushed the plate away, leaning back in silence. The clink of cutlery rang too loud in the quiet air. His phone buzzed constantly beside him, vibrating against polished wood. Messages from investors, alerts from markets, emails from partners. Each demanded his attention, pulling him deeper into the world he had built. With a weary sigh, he silenced it, craving escape from the noise. On the way to the elevator, his eyes caught the fractured mirror once again. The line across it seemed sharper in daylight, merciless in its honesty. He stood still, unable to look away. The man staring back carried fear not of failure, but of being forgotten. Michael straightened his tie, forcing composure onto his face. He had mastered this mask over the years. The world expected perfection, power, certainty. Yet behind the mask was only exhaustion, a man drained of himself. He whispered under his breath, as if confessing to the glass. "You don't know me anymore," he muttered. His reflection gave no reply. Only the crack stared back, widening in his mind. For a fleeting second he imagined shattering the mirror entirely, but fear kept him frozen. What if he saw nothing at all behind it? The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside, pressing the button with mechanical precision. The ride down was smooth, but his mind churned. His empire waited outside, demanding his every ounce. But Michael felt the weight of chains he had forged himself. As the doors slid open, the city welcomed him with its endless energy. Skyscrapers gleamed, people rushed, and his name carried respect. But Michael felt like an imposter among them. He had money, status, power, and yet no peace. The golden cage followed him everywhere. Walking into the day, Michael forced a smile for those who greeted him. Inside, the mirror's image haunted him still. The fractured reflection lingered in his mind, whispering truths he didn't want to hear. He wondered if anyone could ever see beyond the cage he had built. Michael stepped into the grand ballroom of the charity gala, chandeliers casting golden light across polished floors. The room buzzed with laughter, deals whispered over champagne, and flashes of cameras. To everyone else, this was a celebration of wealth and generosity. To him, it felt like another performance. He wore the mask of success, but inside, he was suffocating. As he moved through the crowd, countless hands reached for his, each smile rehearsed. Compliments about his empire echoed around him, but none touched his heart. He nodded politely, offering empty thanks. The applause and admiration felt meaningless. Then, a voice from the past cut through the noise, pulling him back to reality. Michael turned and saw her Emily. She stood near the silent auction table, wearing a modest dress, her presence radiant without excess. For a moment, time rewound, and he remembered childhood laughter under the summer sun. She smiled faintly, but her eyes held no admiration. Instead, they carried questions. Sharp, honest, unavoidable questions. They exchanged greetings, her words warm but piercing. "You've built an empire, Michael, but do you still remember who you used to be?" Her tone wasn't cruel, yet it struck harder than any insult. The world around him blurred. For the first time in years, someone wasn't impressed. Someone saw beyond the mask. Michael forced a smile, masking the sting in his chest. He tried to change the subject, but Emily's gaze held firm. He realized she wasn't here to admire the man he had become, but to remind him of the boy he had abandoned. Her words echoed long after she walked away, haunting him deeper than applause ever could. The drive home was silent, the city lights rushing past his tinted windows. Michael leaned back in his leather seat, Emily's words replaying endlessly. "Do you still remember who you used to be?" He clenched his fists as if holding on to an answer he didn't have. The question cut deeper than any business rival ever could. Inside the penthouse, the silence was deafening. The cracked mirror greeted him again, mocking with its distorted reflection. He stared at himself, remembering the certainty he once carried as a young dreamer. Now, the reflection stared back with empty eyes, stripped of conviction. Emily had seen the truth. He could no longer hide from it. Michael poured another drink, but even whiskey failed to dull the sting. For years he believed wealth would erase the pain of the past. Yet Emily's presence had reopened wounds he thought were healed. He envied her strength, the way she stood firm in her values. She carried authenticity he had lost. The phone buzzed on the table, Richard's name flashing across the screen. Michael ignored it, unable to face business at that moment. Deals, profits, and power suddenly felt meaningless compared to the single sentence Emily had spoken. It wasn't about his empire anymore. It was about who he had become, or rather, who he had forgotten. As he sat in silence, Michael realized the mirror wasn't broken by accident. Perhaps it had shattered because even glass couldn't hold the weight of lies forever. He pressed his palm against the crack, whispering softly, "Who am I now?" But the reflection gave no answer. Only emptiness stared back, cold and unforgiving. Richard leaned against the glass wall of Michael's office, his voice smooth and persuasive. "This new contract is the future, Michael. Billions on the line, guaranteed." His eyes gleamed with hunger, a predator scenting blood. Michael listened, but his mind wandered. Emily's words echoed louder than Richard's promises, stirring unrest deep inside. The documents on the table promised expansion into foreign markets, but the cost was steep. Hidden within the fine print were clauses that exploited vulnerable communities. Michael's chest tightened. Richard framed it as strategy, progress, inevitability. Yet Michael saw greed, dressed in expensive suits. For the first time, he questioned if signing would break more than laws. Richard noticed his hesitation and pressed harder, his tone sharp. "Don't lose focus. You built this empire to dominate. Weakness isn't an option." Michael flinched, recognizing the truth beneath the words. It wasn't his empire anymore, it was Richard's vision, fueled by ambition. He had surrendered control without realizing when. Michael tried to argue, suggesting restraint, but Richard scoffed. "Restraint is for the poor, not us. Do you want to be remembered as a legend or a ghost?" The words hit harder than expected. A ghost, that was what Emily had seen. Michael remained silent, staring at his reflection in the window, trapped between shadows. The meeting ended with Richard confident, Michael uncertain. Papers remained unsigned, resting like poison on the table. Alone, Michael sat, with the silence pressing in. He wasn't sure which was heavier, the threat of losing his empire or the weight of losing himself. The shadows of ambition lingered, tightening their grip. Mrs. Parker moved quietly through the penthouse, her steps steady despite her age. She had worked for Michael since his first taste of success. That evening, she found him sitting in darkness, drink in hand, the mirror glinting faintly behind him. Without a word, she placed a blanket over his shoulders. Michael looked up, startled. "You shouldn't worry about me." But Mrs. Parker only shook her head, her gaze kind and firm. "I've seen you rise, Michael. I've also seen what you've lost along the way." Her voice carried the weight of years, of truths no one else dared speak. He couldn't meet her eyes. She reminded him of the boy who once dreamed of buying his mother flowers with his first paycheck. The boy who worked late nights, not for greed, but for family. "That boy had fire in his eyes," she said softly. "Now all I see is a man haunted by emptiness." Her words pierced deeper than Richard's. Michael's throat tightened, memories rushing back. Long nights studying by candlelight, promises whispered to himself that money would never change him. Yet it had. Mrs. Parker's truth stripped away his defenses. "You became rich, but you let poverty into your soul," she added, her eyes glistening. Michael felt exposed, vulnerable. For the first time, he broke down, confessing the doubts that tormented him. Mrs. Parker placed a hand over his, steady and warm. "It's not too late," she whispered, "but you must choose which man you want to be." Michael turned to the mirror once more. The crack remained, but now it looked like a path. Michael arrived at the office the next morning, but his mind was miles away. The boardroom buzzed with projections and numbers, yet he barely heard them. On one side was Richard's relentless pursuit of expansion, ruthless and profitable. On the other was Emily's silent judgment, echoing in his thoughts. He felt trapped between two lives. Richard presented charts, his words sharp with ambition. "This deal will cement us as untouchable," he declared, the room nodding in agreement. Michael forced a smile, though his stomach churned. He knew the decision lay with him, but he no longer trusted his own instincts. Each nod of approval felt like chains tightening. Later, in the quiet of his office, he looked at a photo hidden in a drawer. It was old, worn him and Emily as children, smiling in the sun. That boy had once dreamed of helping others, not exploiting them. He wondered if Emily could even see that boy in him anymore, or if he had vanished forever. That evening, he attended another event, one filled with shallow conversations and hollow laughter. Emily was there too, speaking with volunteers about her foundation. The passion in her eyes made him feel small, insignificant. For the first time, he envied not her success but her freedom. She was still whole. As the night ended, Emily caught his gaze across the room. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked. It was a look that pierced deeper than any words. Michael realized then that he couldn't keep balancing both worlds. A choice was coming, and it would define who he truly was. The next morning, Michael drove aimlessly until he found himself in the neighborhood of his childhood. The streets were narrower, the buildings aged, but the air felt lighter. He parked the car and stepped out, walking past the small grocery store that once gave him his first job. Memories rushed in with every step. Children played in the street, laughing as they chased a ball. Their joy was simple, unburdened by ambition. Michael watched, remembering when he was one of them. He had run through these very streets, dreaming of a future filled with purpose. Back then, money was just a tool, never the goal itself. He stopped in front of his old home, now worn but still standing. The doorframe bore the marks of height measurements, faint but visible. He smiled faintly, remembering how his mother had celebrated every inch he grew. It wasn't the house that made those years special, it was the love inside it. An elderly neighbor recognized him and waved, surprised. "Michael, I never thought I'd see you back here." Their conversation was brief but heartfelt. She spoke of the community's struggles, of how little had changed. Michael felt shame twist in his chest. All his wealth, yet he had done nothing for the place that raised him. Driving back to the city, the contrast was overwhelming. Towers of glass rose in the distance, a world far removed from the cracked sidewalks he had just walked. For the first time, he wondered if he had built his empire on foundations of forgetting. The past whispered, reminding him of who he used to be. Michael returned to his office late at night, files scattered across his desk. He had begun reviewing contracts more carefully, no longer blindly trusting Richard's guidance. That's when he found them hidden agreements tied to shell companies. The evidence was clear. Richard was planning something dangerous, something that could destroy everything. The deeper Michael read, the more his stomach sank. Richard wasn't just risking their empire, he was targeting Emily's foundation. If the deal went through, her non-profit would be crushed under financial pressure. Michael felt the room spin. Betrayal wasn't strong enough a word. This was calculated sabotage, cloaked in ambition. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. Richard had always been bold, but this was treachery. How long had he been blind? How many times had he signed away trust without looking deeper? The reflection in the office window offered no comfort, just the shadow of a man caught in a trap. Michael's phone buzzed, Richard's name flashing again. He ignored it, staring instead at Emily's photo in the drawer. For the first time, his empire and his conscience collided directly. Protecting Emily's work meant tearing apart the very foundation of his own success. The decision would not come without sacrifice. With trembling hands, Michael gathered the documents and locked them away. The betrayal was undeniable, and now it demanded action. He knew Richard would not forgive opposition, but silence was no longer an option. The choice was clear: protect his empire of lies or protect the truth and the woman who reminded him of it. The following morning, Richard stormed into Michael's office, sharp and impatient. "Why haven't you signed the deal?" His voice was laced with suspicion. Michael studied him, searching for traces of the friend he once trusted. But all he saw was hunger for power, a man consumed by greed. "I read everything," Michael said firmly, sliding the folder across the desk. "You're not just risking us. You're targeting people who don't deserve this." Richard's smirk twisted into annoyance. "Business isn't about deserving, Michael. It's about winning. Do you want to keep being a legend or fade into irrelevance?" The words stung because they mirrored his deepest fear, yet Emily's voice echoed louder. "Do you still remember who you used to be?" Michael straightened his posture. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of Richard. "I'd rather be a man I can live with than a legend built on ruins." His tone cut through the silence. Richard leaned closer, eyes burning. "If you walk away from this, you'll lose everything. The board will turn on you. The investors will abandon you. You'll be nothing. Michael held his gaze, the weight of the choice pressing hard. But deep inside, a new strength flickered, something real, something unshakable. When Richard stormed out, Michael collapsed into his chair. His decision had been made, though its cost loomed like a storm. He knew the empire might crumble, his wealth vanish, his reputation collapse. But for the first time, he felt clarity. Losing everything was frightening, but losing himself was no longer an option. The boardroom was packed, tension thick in the air. Michael stood at the head of the table, documents in hand, exposing Richard's schemes. His voice was steady, but each word felt like fire. Investors shifted uncomfortably, some shocked, others skeptical. For the first time, Michael chose truth over preservation. Richard fought back with venom, painting Michael as unstable and desperate. He twisted the narrative, accusing him of weakness. Murmurs spread through the room, loyalty wavering. Michael presented evidence, but betrayal works faster than facts. One by one, hands began to turn against him, siding with Richard's ruthless certainty. When the meeting ended, Michael's empire lay in ruins. The board voted him out, stripping him of titles, power, and control. Richard smirked triumphantly, the crown now his. Michael walked out of the skyscraper he had built, his footsteps echoing with loss. The empire no longer belonged to him. That night, headlines spread like wildfire. Tech titan falls from power. Social media feasted on his downfall, dissecting his legacy with cold amusement. Former allies vanished, their silence deafening. In one brutal day, Michael had lost everything he had worked for. Yet beneath the pain, he felt strangely lighter. Alone in his penthouse, Michael stared at the broken mirror once again. His reflection was stripped of wealth, stripped of status. For the first time, the crack didn't feel mocking, it felt honest. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, "Maybe this is who I was meant to find." The days that followed were suffocating. Michael's phone stopped ringing, emails stopped arriving. The silence that once felt like luxury now pressed against his chest, like chains. He wandered through his penthouse, each room echoing with emptiness. Without business to consume him, he was left with only himself. At night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories replayed relentlessly, his rise, his compromises, his betrayals of self. The wealth had vanished like smoke, but the guilt remained heavy. He thought of Emily's eyes, of the disappointment they carried. Losing his empire was one thing, but losing her respect hurt more. He stopped attending events, stopped answering messages. The city outside lived on, thriving without him. He had become invisible, a ghost haunting his own success. Loneliness gnawed at him, reminding him that admiration had never been love. The applause had faded, leaving only silence. One evening, he found himself sitting on the floor in front of the mirror again. The crack glowed faintly in the dim light, splitting his face into fragments. "Who am I now?" he whispered, the words barely audible. His reflection offered no comfort, only a reminder of what he had lost. For the first time in years, Michael let himself weep. The tears came heavy, unstoppable, washing over years of denial. He wasn't crying for his empire, he was crying for the boy he had abandoned, for the man he had betrayed. In the darkness, broken yet raw, he finally allowed himself to feel. Michael sat in silence when the doorbell rang. He hesitated, expecting no one. Opening the door, he found Emily standing there, her presence calm but powerful. For a moment, words failed him. Shame washed over him, remembering the last time they spoke. He expected judgment, but her eyes held something else entirely. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. Michael stepped aside, still uncertain. They sat in the living room, surrounded by untouched luxuries. Emily didn't look at the grandeur. She looked only at him. "You've lost much," she said, "but maybe that's what you needed." Her words struck like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Michael confessed everything, the betrayal, the collapse, the emptiness. His voice cracked, raw with pain he had hidden for years. Emily listened without interruption, her silence filled with understanding. When he finished, he couldn't meet her gaze. "I've lost who I am," he whispered. She reached out, her hand resting on his. "You haven't lost him," Emily replied. "He's been buried but not gone, and you still have a choice to live differently." Her voice was steady, unwavering. Michael felt something shift within him. For the first time, he believed he wasn't beyond redemption. He saw hope reflected in her eyes. Tears welled again, but these felt different, lighter, cleansing. Emily squeezed his hand gently. "Come help me with the foundation. If you want to find yourself again, start there." It wasn't pity she offered, but purpose. Michael nodded slowly, realizing this was the chance he thought would never come. The following weeks brought change Michael hadn't expected. He traded boardrooms for community centers, tailored suits for rolled-up sleeves. At first it felt strange, alien, even to be so close to people who had nothing. But with every project, every face he met, something inside him began to heal. Emily guided him through the work, introducing him to families and children who relied on the foundation. Michael listened to their stories, stories of resilience and struggle. Each encounter chipped away at his pride, replacing it with humility. For the first time, his wealth wasn't the focus, his presence was. Mrs. Parker joined them often, helping wherever she could. Her gentle wisdom reminded Michael of his roots, grounding him when doubts crept in. She watched him carefully, and for the first time in years she smiled with genuine pride. "The boy I knew," she whispered once, "is finding his way back." The work wasn't easy. Sacrifices were constant, long hours, emotional weight, and the sting of realizing how blind he had once been. Yet each challenge carried meaning. Michael began to feel alive in a way his empire had never given him. He wasn't building profits anymore, he was rebuilding lives, including his own. One evening, standing beside Emily after a long day, Michael looked out at the city skyline. It no longer seemed like a cage, but a place full of possibilities. "I lost everything," he said quietly, "but maybe that's how I found what matters." Emily smiled, and for once his reflection felt whole again. Weeks turned into months, and Michael's new life began to feel natural. He no longer chased headlines or profits. Instead, he focused on people. His days were filled with laughter, tears, and stories from those he helped. Slowly, the emptiness within him faded. What grew in its place was purpose, real and unshakable. One evening, Michael returned to his penthouse, though it no longer felt like a fortress of isolation. He walked past the grand halls, stopping at the mirror that had haunted him for so long. The crack remained, jagged across the glass, yet when he looked into it now, he saw something different. His reflection no longer felt foreign. The eyes staring back held clarity, strength, and humility. The broken line across the glass no longer mocked him. It told the story of his journey. He realized he didn't need perfection to be whole. He needed truth, scars, and all. For the first time, he accepted himself. Emily arrived shortly after, bringing reports from the foundation. They laughed together, the sound filling the once empty room with warmth. Mrs. Parker joined them, carrying tea, her smile tender. The penthouse wasn't silent anymore. It wasn't filled with echoes of emptiness. It was alive again, with voices that mattered. That night, Michael stood before the mirror once more. "I know you now," he whispered to his reflection. The man in the glass was no longer a stranger, but someone he recognized fully. He had lost everything the world thought important, only to find the one thing that truly mattered, himself. In the end, Michael learned that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in love, purpose, and the people who stand by us. What about you? Do you believe money can buy happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more emotional stories, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one.